Why do social media platforms become more attractive the more people use them? And why, for example, do luxury items lose their appeal once too many people own them or buy them? And the answer to that lies in the so-called network externalities. In this video, I will focus on the positive network externalities, which are also known as the bandwagon effect. Up to now, we usually assumed that demand is independent of the use of others. So in other words, my own willingness to pay for a certain product only depends on the price and my personal preferences, but does not depend on how many other people want to buy the good or use the good. But there are many real-world examples and real-world markets where this assumption does not hold. For example, in the presence of network externalities. And network externalities basically mean that a feedback effect exists where the number of other users affects my own willingness to pay. And there are two main types. So the positive network externalities, the bandwagon effect, that can be, for example, seen with the internet. If only a few people use it, it's not so useful, right? But if more people are starting using it, it gains in attractiveness for others as well. So there is more information, you can do more things, you can visit more sites, and so on and so forth. Or, for example, the uses of a common standard. So when you had for example, Blu-ray and HDVDs in that case, then it depends quite a lot of how many people use one of these standards. That this also has effects on others. So the more people use one of the standards, the more attractive this standard becomes. And there are negative network externalities where a greater number of market participants reduces the usefulness of the product. And here, for example, luxury items could be such products where the exclusiveness of the product is what people pay for. And if everybody suddenly has this good, then the good loses in attractiveness for one particular person. The congestion of roads is another thing. So if many people use roads, they become more congested. The usefulness of using the road for one person decreases. Or say traveling to less traveled places. So some people have a preference for going on vacation to places where they do not see many other tourists. And if many other tourists kind of then show up at this place, then of course it loses the attractiveness to those who seek solitude or so. As I said, in this video I focus on positive network externalities and explain them graphically. In the next video I show the case for negative network externalities. So now let's start. We have again the diagram here where we have demand on the horizontal axis, we have the price on the vertical axis, and we have a downward sloping demand curve that is comparatively steep. And that's the case of a low user base. So for a low user base, we would, for example, have that one person has a demand here for at a price of 30. That is given by the quantity on the x-axis. Now, if the price would decrease to P2, this person would have a higher demand, but since the demand curve is steep, the demand does not increase tremendously due to this price decrease. However, what happens now in the background is that the price decrease also leads to more other users. So the demand curve itself now would shift because you have a higher user base, so more people start using the product, and this increases the willingness to pay of the first consumer that we analyzed here for every given price, because for every given price you have more other users in the network. Since this is a positive externality, it means that the usefulness of this particular product for the first person increased, and that means this person is willing to pay a higher price than previously, right? So for this particular consumer, or this particular market with the many consumers that we have here, we would have a rightward shift of the demand curve. Now we consider again the situation where the consumer is first at this optimal point and then the price decreases, but actually we are now not anymore at this point, but due to the shift of the demand curve to the high user base case, we have a total shift of demand not only to this level here, but to this much higher level here. So the actual demand curve in this market would be the red one here. So it's less steep than the two demand curves for the low user base case and for the high user base case. In the end, we end up at this intersection here with the price P2 and the demand curve for a high user base. So in other words, what did we have? We again had two different effects. So the total effect is the move from the price P1 and the consumption here on the x-axis of this level to P2 and the consumption on the x-axis of this level, right? So the total effect is this long arrow here, and it is decomposed between pure price effect, that is this initial effect here along the low user base demand curve, and then a bandwagon effect that is solely due to the positive externality of the higher user base. And this is this arrow here. So the total effect, the total change, is due to the direct effect of the price change and the bandwagon effect that applies because more users mean that the product becomes more useful for one single user. So overall, if we look at the demand curve, the red curve here, this demand curve is more elastic than the two demand curves where we do not consider a change in the user base here. So to summarize, with positive network externalities, other users increase my own willingness to pay. This means that my own demand depends on the size of the user base, and the price change then leads to not only a direct price effect, so that demand would increase if the price decreases, but also the bandwagon effect, so that the price decrease induces others to buy the good or sign up for the good or whatever, and that increases my own usefulness for this particular good. And that's the case of a positive network externality that makes the overall demand curve in the market more price elastic than in a model where this externality does not exist. And we will in the next video discuss the effect of a negative externality, a negative network externality, which is the case of a snob effect, basically. So that's the in contrast to the bandwagon effect, the snob effect that we will discuss next.